Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the South Derbyshire series, a district of Derbyshire which stretches from Leicestershire to Staffordshire, containing 50 civil parishes. Here's one of them for you. Welcome back to South Derbyshire, everybody, for another run in this glorious part of the county of Derby. Now here, we're beginning this one at a very familiar river. You all know what this is. That is the River Trent, which we have seen in many locations before, both in Derbyshire and in Nottinghamshire as well. Now, in this episode, we're going to be walking between two stretches of water. One, of course, is the Trent. The other is the Trent and Mersey Canal, and there are plenty of other landmarks in between the two. This is the village and the parish of Swarkestone. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like, and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Swarkestone, Swarkestone Run. Time for another run in South Derbyshire again, and next up in the series we have Swarkestone, which contains a set of landmarks like no other village in Derbyshire. This one sits on the River Trent and has for centuries lain at a vital crossing point of that river and the marshland that surrounds it. Since the 13th century, travellers have overcome the watery obstacles here by way of Swarkestone Bridge, one of the longest in the country, which extends for almost a mile to the south of the village after crossing the river. The village itself is pretty small, possessing as it does a church, a nursery, a cricket club, a pub, and two main clusters of housing on Church Lane and Woodshop Lane respectively. However, away from the main village, there are a number of other things of interest. In the northern reaches of this one is the Trent and Mersey Canal, which passes through Swarkestone Lock. There's also a fine Jacobean grandstand here too, known as the Pavilion. All of those are on our walking route. Even further afield though, Swarkestone also covers part of the city of Derby. Known as Chellaston Fields, it's an area containing the parish's only school, a supermarket, and a few other businesses. It also gives us a boundary anomaly to discuss. So, there's a lot here. Why are we still talking? Let's go. We start this journey around Swarkestone at the River Trent, which runs along the southern edge of the village. For several centuries, Swarkestone has been a major crossing point of this river, and it remains so today. We've spoken at length about the Trent before, but never actually about what its name means. As we've learned in previous episodes, river names often describe their nature. Trent literally means the one that floods. Ironically, it's perilously close to the village, which has no flood defences. I would imagine that this has maybe been an issue for residents in the past. Church Lane is a dead end for vehicles, but luckily for us, we can access the main road from here as there's a short footway. It affords us a great view of Swarkestone Bridge, an ancient structure which was for about 300 years the Midlands' main crossing of the Trent. It remains to this day the only crossing point of the river between Burton-upon-Trent and Nottingham. It was built in the 13th century, and it's a lot longer than it looks. The part you can see here is the bit that crosses the river, but the structure continues south along a causeway across what was once marshland. We've reached the A514 now, and here we have a bus stop. Swarkestone is served by just the one bus service, the number 2 between Derby and Swadlincote. Nearby is the only pub, the Crew and Harper. This takes its name from a well-respected family with its roots in the Peak District. It was once an 18th century coaching inn, and it's Grade 2 listed. Its adjoining stable block has been converted into hotel accommodation, whilst the main building is mostly dedicated to dining. The garden across the road slopes down to the river, and it contains our next landmark, and one that's very unusual. This cairn marks the point where in 1745, during the Jacobite rising led by Bonnie Prince Charlie, his army, bound for London, reached Swarkestone. They didn't get any further though. Finding no reports of support from the south, they turned back to Derby before retreating to Scotland and their final defeat at the Battle of Culloden. And speaking of battles, the English Civil War featured one here too. The Battle of Swarkestone Bridge was fought in 1643, with the Cavaliers losing out on that day. We'll be back to the bridge in a bit, but for now let's head up Woodshop Lane to the next landmark. Swarkestone has no post office these days, but it used to, and you're looking at it. It was this house on the end of the road. Standing proud on the opposite corner is Swarkestone Nursery. What began as a market garden business in the 20th century has now flourished into an all-year-round garden centre. During the late 1980s, this grew bedding plants, but it was only as a side project to vegetable sales. By 1999, vegetable production stopped, and this became a full-blown garden centre a year later. Our next landmark is in the field opposite. It's a cricket club. Trust me, it's there somewhere. Swarkestone Cricket Club can trace their history back to the 1930s. The ground is known by the name of Barrow Turn. The club field 3 senior teams in the Derbyshire County Cricket League, and they've won the league title on 4 occasions: 2013, 2016, 2022 and 2023. They have women's teams too, as well as an established junior training section that plays competitive cricket. Running alongside the club across a field is a public right-of-way, and this is our ticket to the Trent and Mersey Canal. It was a bit boggy in places, but at least it's flat until you reach the railway. The railway in question is the Castle-Donington line. This is alternatively known as the Western-on-Trent Branch Railway, and it's a spur. It serves one primary purpose: to connect the Nottingham to Lincoln and the Midland main lines with the Crewe to Derby line. Its route avoids Derby, which makes it a good choice for freight traffic. Once over the railway, there's a second smaller field to cross before the path slopes uphill towards some tall buildings on the bank of the Trent and Mersey Canal. Like the railway, this too was built with connections in mind. The brainchild of canal engineer James Brindley, this was built to link the River Trent at Derwent Mouth in Derbyshire to the River Mersey, and thereby provide an inland route between the 2 major ports of Hull and Liverpool. Construction of it began in 1766. This section is known as Swarkestone Stop Bar, which features this crane, one of the few surviving examples of canal-side infrastructure in the country. This is near a Grade 2 listed toll house which dates from the early 19th century. There's evidence that buildings on this section of the canal were originally finished with a lime wash. The Trent and Mersey's total length is 93.5 miles, and for the majority of its route, it's termed a narrow canal. It has several locks. In 1777, when the canal was fully completed, it included more than 70 locks and 5 tunnels. This is Swarkestone Lock number 5. Before the canal existed, boats used the Trent to trade between Burton and Nottingham. The Trent and Mersey effectively killed off the riverboat trade, but in turn, the coming of the railways meant canal trade soon died away too. Now the Trent and Mersey is wholly for pleasure craft. Okay, so now we're making our way back to the village to see the other half of it. There are two major landmarks left. One of them is the church, which you might just be able to see here. I'm not totally sure if you can because it's a long way away. It's there. I don't know whether you can just see the tower. But the other one is over here, and that is the Swarkestone Pavilion. What's that, you ask? Well, you're about to find out. Look to your right as you approach the village again and you'll spot a petrol station on the A514, which has the only shop in the village. That's not the only one in the parish though, stick with me on that one. We're now looking southeast over a field known as the Cuttle, and the untrained eye would likely conclude there's nothing here. Not so. Keep walking and you'll eventually hit a track that leads to Swarkestone Pavilion, a Grade 1 listed Jacobean grandstand attributed to the architect John Smithson, who also designed Bolsover Castle. The pavilion was constructed between 1630 and 1632 and sits 200 metres to the north of the ruins of Swarkestone Hall. Its frontage displays the arms of Sir John Harper and his wife who lived at the hall. The purpose of the building is a matter of debate. It's been suggested it may have been a banqueting house or a decorative part of a formal garden. In 1968, the Rolling Stones had a photo shoot in and around the pavilion for the album Beggar's Banquet. They were never used, but some did surface on their first compilation album, Hot Rocks. Nearby is another ancient building, an old tithe barn. After crossing the field from the pavilion, we're at St James's Church, another Grade 2 listed building. This one originally dates from the 12th and the 16th centuries, although it was rebuilt between 1874 and 76 by Frederick Josias Robinson of Derby. The rebuild saw the west gallery and the high pews removed, an arcade of 3 arches erected between the nave and the aisle, and new high-pitched roofs placed over the whole building. The east window of 3 lights was fitted with a new stained glass window too by Burleson and Grills. It was a gift of the Dowager Lady Crewe. Exiting the church, here we have an old reading room, a small house of the early 19th century, which was later converted for use as a parish room. Used for vestry meetings and parish events, it became a private house in the late 1970s. It's another Grade 2 listed building. We're almost back to the start. All that remains is a cluster of buildings between the church and reading room and the Trent. Lovely village, Swarkestone, and loaded with history. But there's more to this parish than that, as I'm about to explain. Okay, so we've almost reached our end point where we started at the River Trent. There are 2 more things I want to do in this episode. First of all, we're going to head up into Derby, because part of Derby actually falls within Swarkestone's parish boundaries, and there's an interesting anomaly, shall we say, where the boundary sort of runs. I'll show you when we get there. The other thing is we need to drive across Swarkestone Bridge. Now, it's important to note that most of Swarkestone Bridge actually falls within Stanton by Roger, not Swarkestone, so you will see this drive out again in a future episode. Let's go and check both things out. This is Chellaston Fields, a detached portion of Swarkestone Parish on the other side of the A50, the road that bypasses the village to the north. Chellaston has expanded outwards into Swarkestone, and as you can tell, this is very much a new estate. Chellaston was a separate village and was mentioned as Celladestune in the Domesday Book. The village was once the largest producer of mined alabaster in the UK, and by the end of the 18th century, it was exporting gypsum to markets in Derby and Stoke. Chellaston's products were even used by Josiah Wedgwood for plaster moulds to shape his pottery. Guess what it was all transported by? Yep, the Trent and Mersey Canal. Now very much residential, this part of the village has a number of brand new facilities. Here we have Chellaston Field Spencer Academy, for example, which has only existed since 2019. With a brand new residential area to serve, it makes sense that right next door is a retail park. This contains a few household names, including an Aldi store and a branch each of Greggs and Costa. The shopping precinct has 137 parking spaces. The Aldi opened in November 2018, becoming in the process the 7th store in Derby. It created some 40 new jobs in the area, all of which were locally sourced. The store was opened by the Olympic gymnast Sam Oldham. If you go to the other side of the junction on the A50, around which all of this lies, there's a separate part of Chellaston Fields which has some other businesses. The largest of these is New Ways, an award-winning managed security service provider who occupy one of the tall office blocks that tower over the area. Those all fall within the parish boundaries, but there is an anomaly to discuss in this area. As big cities like Derby expand ever outwards, they start to cross parish and district boundaries. Sometimes they can be moved to accommodate the new builds, but more often than not, they remain in situ. That can lead to a crazy situation like the one we have here at the end of Griffin Close. So as you'll have seen, this is a dead end, and this is the most crazy anomaly. We have seen something similar to this before in Lincoln, but here in Derby it happens as well. The parish boundary, I'm stood right on it, and the way to know that you are on the parish boundary is look at the bins. Take this house here, number 4. That has South Derbyshire Council bins. I know that because if I just go up here, you can see, you might be able to see, I don't know. See the bin there? The black bin says South Derbyshire Council, but if you look at number 2 next door, those are Derby City Council bins. This kind of thing makes a lot of difference to your council services because depending on where the boundaries fall depends which council governs your property, and it's quite an amazing thing to think that your next door neighbour could be in a different part of the country effectively. There you go, it's one of those things, isn't it? Right, time to move on to Swarkestone Bridge. So to finish with, we're driving over the bridge and onto the Causeway over the marshes. Here's the story about how Swarkestone Bridge came to be a thing in the first place. It was built thanks to 2 sisters, the Bellamonts, who financed its construction after the tragedy that befell their prospective spouses. Both sisters were engaged and were throwing a joint celebration. However, beforehand, their fiancés had to meet the local barons on the other side of the river. When it was time to go back, the Trent had become swollen after a storm. This didn't stop the men trying to ford the river on horseback, but it ended badly. Both were swept away and drowned. This led to the sisters to commission the bridge so that no one else would suffer the tragedy that they had. Ironically, neither sister ever married and both died in poverty, having exhausted their fortunes on building the bridge. They were buried in a single grave in Prestwold in Leicestershire, and that is a parish, so hopefully we'll find them in the future. For now, we can be thankful to them that they had this wonderful idea. How many lives might this bridge have saved? Who knows? What I do know is we're done with this episode, and I'll see you elsewhere down the road. Thanks for watching this video, folks. Don't forget to like this episode if you haven't already. It really makes a difference with YouTube. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us a share too if you've got friends who'd like it. You can find all the links to my social media accounts below, as well as my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can donate to the channel. Also, if you've enjoyed this episode, have a look at some more videos in this series. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.